See. There we go. Hare Krishna. Thank you all for coming. Sorry. There you go. Yeah, that's good. Just I joined the Hare Krishna movement in 1969 in Berkeley. And there was a very widespread belief within the movement at that time that in the world there were many sectarian religions or dogmatic religions, but that Krishna consciousness was something different. It was a spiritual science. It was firmly based on real philosophy rather than faith, ritual, and dogma. Now, it's interesting and important periodically to ask ourselves whether we still function as a spiritual science and not simply as one of many religions based on faith, ritual, and dogma. If you look at the history of world religions, almost in every case, they began as not so much with the idea of being a sectarian religion. Some cases they were, but the idea of simply giving knowledge. It was about the knowledge. It was about the realization that was possible. And then, of course, as we know, we don't know. So here's the point. What happens to religions over time? What happens to religions over time? And after spending a long time studying world religions, it seems to me that it's not so much as one might think that the religion makes people a certain way, but rather human nature, the nature of human beings, tends to, over historical time, transform religious or spiritual movements into something like ritualistic, dogmatic religions. And so I think it's interesting, not only interesting, but important for those of us who are seriously engaged in Krishna consciousness to have some awareness of that process so that we can periodically test ourselves. Just like periodically you test to see if your motor oil is still clear, whether you need to change your oil and so on. So it's good. So I think it'd be interesting to look at the human factors. One thing is that most people are not philosophers. If you look at human society in general, well, let's do this. You can actually look up and see how many people buy philosophy books as opposed to how many people buy popular music or how many people buy 6 packs of beer. Or you can see, you can do a simple study, and I think a simple study will show that let's say bottles and cans of beer are thousands of times more popular in this world than philosophy books. And even when Prabhupada was here, he used to complain that many of his disciples did not really study his books. I mean, they were enthusiastic and they were serving, they were good people, but they were just not inclined to read books on theology. So one thing that happens to religions as they grow is that most people in religions are not philosophically inclined. And they may, at a certain point in their life, agree, okay, this is the truth, this particular doctrine is the truth. And so now I have my community. And then and when you join a religious community, there's all these social ties. That's where your friends are. And there's also the psychological principle of inertia. When you've been doing something a long time, it gets to a point where it's just too troubling to change. It's like, you just don't want to go there, because does that mean that I was doing something wrong all this time? People don't like to think that about themselves. And all my friends are here and I already have my life. And so there's all kinds of things that are going on, just psychological inertia. I mean, Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita that 4 kinds of people approach me. Chaturvidha bhajante mam. I think that's chapter 7. Chaturvidha, 4 kinds. Chaturvidha bhajante mam jana, 4 kinds of people. Sukritina. And Krishna says they're all Sukriti. I'll just give you one little sample of how English is intimately connected to Sanskrit. And I won't do this for the whole lecture. You may not have that much enjoyment in grammar, but Su in Sanskrit means good. So Sukriti means like a good doer, someone that does good, Sukriti. And we still have the Sanskrit Su in English, but as in the case of many Sanskrit words, it went through Greek, because Greece is a lot closer to India than America or England. And so in Greek, as you may know, the Greeks, actually, I'll just tell you, I'm just going to amuse myself and go through this really quickly. The next door neighbor to India, to the west, northwest, because if you go straight west, you'd be in the ocean. So if you go northwest of India, you come to Persia. And actually, ancient Persians spoke a dialect of Sanskrit. The great Persian emperor, Cyrus the Great, who is called a Messiah in the Old Testament because he freed the Jews from Babylonia and let them go back to Israel and helped them rebuild their temple. So Cyrus the Great actually spoke a dialect of Sanskrit. In fact, in his own language, which is a Sanskrit dialect, his name was not Cyrus, but Kurus, which is a very popular king name in the Mahabharata. So anyway, this simple thing, Su, the Persians pronounce the S as H. That's where you get the word Hindu, from the Sindhu River. So if you pronounce the Su with an H, it becomes Hu. And then the next door neighbor to Persia was Greece, and they don't pronounce an H at the beginning of a word, like in the word honor or hour, like how many hours. That's from the Greek. And so if you take the H off the Hu, it just becomes U or ew, which is the English prefix U, like euphemism. Euphemism or euphonics. Euphonics means good sound, or eugenics, good breeding. Anyway, just a little linguistic interlude there. So Sukriti, and Kriti, of course, Kriti from the Sanskrit verb kur, to make, which we still have in English in words like create and increase. And so Sukriti, Krishna says it all, anyway, that's the end of the linguistics. So Krishna says that everyone that approaches God, assuming they're not, let's say, like a violent terrorist or something, but that everyone who approaches God is in a sense a pious person. But there are 4 kinds. So the 4 kinds are, first of all, there's arto, which means one who's suffering. It's very common that people, even atheists actually, think if they're really in pain, they suddenly find religion. So the first type is artha, the suffering person, and then artho, and then jigyasur. Won't go into all the grammar. It means someone who's curious. Someone, in other words, okay, curious doesn't mean you're necessarily super pious, that you really want to worship God. It just means you're curious. You're curious and you're not a jerk who, assumes that there is no God. Atheism is very bad philosophy. I mean, never mind how impious it is. It's really just bad philosophy for the simple reason that if there's no God, then no one knows everything. Because if someone's omniscient, that would be God. So if there's no God, no one knows everything. If no one knows everything, no one knows if there's God or not. So agnosticism is, you could say, I just don't know. That's fair, that's honest. But atheism, someone says, I know there's no God, they're just a terrible philosopher because it's self-contradictory. So there's arto and then jigyasu, someone who's just curious, like, I wonder if there's a God, or if there is a God, I wonder what it is. Not necessarily devoted, but curious. So arto, jigyasur, and then aratarati, which means someone who is seeking help, like financial help. Someone who's really down and out. There's all these television programs Sunday morning where people can, sort of like, hi, I'm God, and if I got a deal for you. So artharti means someone who wants money from God or just some kind of material benefit. And the last one is jnani. Jnani, which it can mean different things in different contexts. In Sanskrit, it literally means one who has knowledge, and sort of like a philosopher, someone who actually knows. And so, and Krishna says, Tesham Jnani Shesa, that of these four, the best is the Jnani. So the Jnani is someone that actually knows God, and the person is approaching God or Krishna because they know that Krishna is God. They know that Krishna is God, and so they're approaching him with full knowledge, not just curious, not just suffering, not just falling on hard times financially, but someone that really knows that this is God and wants to have a relationship with God. So interestingly, only 25% of the people that approach Krishna actually are, well, you could say maybe 50%. The Jnani also has some philosophical interest, but we don't know, like what if it turns out that if all people approach God, only 1% actually know who God is, or maybe 5 or 10%. You can do a survey, right? We can do a survey at everything right now. And you can find out of all the people who say that sometimes they go to a church or temple or mandir or something, or synagogue or mosque, how many of them it's really about the knowledge? I don't think you're going to get a very big number there. But in any case, so you get a bunch of people. If you look at how religious movements get started, we have a fairly clear picture of how Christianity began from especially the book of the Acts of the Apostles, but also you could say the New Testament in general gives us a fairly good picture. The problem is, of course, that it was written a few generations after Jesus, and according to the New Testament, all of the first disciples of Jesus were illiterate peasants. And so it's this amazing telephone game going on for about 40, 50 years. And so finally, when they got people who could actually read and write, they wrote a book. So anyway, but what happens? Let's say people join a religion, you get a religion, it survives, because just like, most startup restaurants don't make it, very dangerous business, restaurants. And religious movements also probably don't have a much higher batting average than restaurants. So most religious movements don't actually make it, because especially in America, everyone and their pet dog is enlightened and has. I'm from California, where if you have like 7 Californians, you'll have 10 new religious movements. And most of them, of course, don't make it. So the ones that survive, and ISKCON has survived. I think at this point, there is adequate historical evidence from an academic point of view that ISKCON is one of the minority groups that actually survives and becomes a permanent movement. Although then you have to ask the question, survived as what? I mean, did the spirit of Prabhupada survive? Did the philosophy, I think, survive? Prabhupada was extremely, what's the word, emphatic, and in his books, although if you read Prabhupada's books in a Krishna conscious state, Krishna consciousness is not only the name of a movement, it's actually a literal term. It means, consciousness of Krishna. So if you're actually in Krishna consciousness and you read Prabhupada's books, you see that even though it can seem like he's sort of repeating the same basic point many, many times, but each time, of course, is nuanced and every time gives a fresh realization. So Prabhupada's, you could say that from, looking at Prabhupada's books, then I want to get back to the main topic, but if you look at philosophy of language, which I'm sure most of you do in your spare time. So if you look at philosophy of language, there are different kinds of speech. Even grammatically, there's like imperative speech and there is just declarative speech and so on, and injunctive speech. But there's a kind of speech which is called performative. And I'm going to make the point that in some ways our books, especially Prabhupada's books, are actually composed of performative speech. Performative speech, and there's other terms for it, is speech which doesn't simply describe something or request something or command something, but it actually creates the reality that it describes. And so an example of that is an umpire in baseball. Even those of you who aren't from America, I hope you have some, you know the word umpire. So if the umpire says you're out, you are out, or a red card in soccer. So if an umpire says you're out, now if a person who's, let's say, the announcer, the broadcaster, who's announcing the game says so and so is out, that's just descriptive. That's just descriptive. The announcer is just describing what's happening. But if the umpire says he's out, saying that actually makes it a fact in the real world. Another example of performative speech is when a man or woman with proper credentials says, I now pronounce you man and wife. So let's say you go to your friend's wedding and you say, hey, you guys are man and wife. You're just describing something. But if the properly credentialed person says, you are now man and wife, the words create the reality. And so Krishna is the Lord of performative speech, because one of the names of Krishna is Satyavad, that whatever Krishna says is actually reality. And this notion that God has the power to make something reality just by saying it is also found in the Old Testament. Let there be light. Let there be light. So when God said, let there be light, there was light. And you go through all these things, let there be this, let there be that. So it's understood actually in various world religions that the power of God is to make something reality just by saying it. So when we read Prabhupada's books, so how does that relate to Prabhupada's books? First of all, Prabhupada's books are full of the performative statements of Krishna, so that it's full of statements that are true just by being stated. And not only true by being stated, but when you read it, it actually becomes, how should I put it? It becomes manifest to you, it becomes revealed to you. So it's not just like, okay, here's a book in which Prabhupada says Krishna is God, and you believe it, so you get some punya points. You get some piety, you make some spiritual advancement because you're believing what it says. It's not just that. It's not just that you believe in it and then your faith is rewarded. It's that when you read Prabhupada's books or other books which are in Prabhupada's line, then the words themselves not only convey to you a certain meaning, as language normally does, but the words actually reveal the reality that they're describing. So that if, let's say, Krishna says, or Prabhupada says about Krishna, that everything comes from me, everything emanates from me, aham sarvasya prabhava. By reading that, you actually experience it, so that the words manifest the reality. That's the sense in which I said there's performative speech, because the language, the words, actually reveal to you the fact. It's not just, okay, it says this in the good book, Shubha Granta, it says this in the good book, so I believe it, but actually you experience it, you see it. You see it. So getting back to what happens to religions, there's kind of a catch-22. Actually, the book Catch-22 is written by the uncle of a disciple of mine, which makes me automatically an authority on that book. But as a movement is successful, if a spiritual religious movement is successful, then many people are attracted. It starts to grow. And inevitably, you get more and more people who, as I put it, aren't necessarily strict practitioners, aren't necessarily philosophically inclined, and gradually, because the percentage of people who believe in a particular spiritual tradition, like in India, for example, I mean, there's hundreds of millions of people who know that Krishna is God, but how many of them are actually seriously practicing bhakti yoga? How many of them are actually seriously practicing bhakti yoga? And that's true in any religion. That's true in any religion. So therefore, if you have the situation where a strong majority of people who claim allegiance to or faith in a particular spiritual tradition, a very strong majority are good people, as Krishna says. They're good people, they're sincere, but they're not necessarily strict practitioners. Now, that wouldn't be a problem. However, the issue arises, especially, I think, when you live in a democratic age. And people have this very strong sense that the majority rules. I don't mean to say by this, I don't mean to say by this that the mass of people who belong to religion, engineer a hostile takeover of the movement or something. That's not my point. But that you get more and more and more people who are good people. They're good people, they're valuable, but not necessarily philosophical. And for example, I would say the dirty little secret of Christianity is that hardly anyone reads the Bible. So, and again, even when Prabhupada was here, he complained that many of his disciples didn't read his books, although they were serving. So then there arises the issue of sort of, because every new religion, hope you don't mind me talking about these things, I just find it interesting to kind of try to get some objectivity. If you look at the history of religions, there's a pattern that always emerges just because it's a human thing. And that is that in the first stage, it's kind of a movement of preachers. And they live very simply. Often there's communal life in the sense that, no one owns any property because everything belongs to God. And so everyone lives together in communes. And then something, bizarre things start happening, like people get married and have children. So for example, if you look at the early history of Buddhism, the first generation, at least, you had to be a male monk to be a Buddhist. A male monk. I mean, that's obviously not going to survive. So then as more people became attracted, the issue arose whether, Can a woman be a Buddhist monk? Can married people be Buddhists? And of course, we know which way it went. I mean, you find this in ISKCON, in the early days, everyone lived in a communal community. Communal means you share the wealth. No one owns anything. That's communalism. And you find the same thing. For example, there's another religion which became quite well known, where if you joined that movement, this is thousands of years ago, if you joined that movement, you had to give all your property. I mean, ISKCON used to be like that. You had to give all your property. And then there was one couple that joined and they were, did you give all your property? Oh yeah, we gave everything. But actually I think they owned some land. They didn't give all their real estate because they were a married couple, may have kids. They wanted to keep a little nest egg. So then what happened is that it was discovered that they hadn't declared all their assets. And both of them, as it so happened, sort of died prematurely. And so the religion officially declared that because they didn't give all their property to the religion, God killed them. Because they didn't give everything they owned. Interestingly, the religion in which this happened is Christianity. And the book in which it's written is called the New Testament. So, and the Hare Krishna movement. So whether it's the Hare Krishna movement, whether it's, you can talk about the Essene, kind of like, ancient Jewish yogis at the Dead Sea, people wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, Christianity and Buddhism and so on. So inevitably, because religions which hold fast this idea only celibate males, I mean, you haven't heard about them because they don't exist anymore. So the religions that do survive, welcome everybody who, basically believes in what we're doing and, just willing to be part of the community in acceptable ways. But then what happens as things start to grow, you get more and more people. I attended a lecture one time at the Harvard Divinity School. I wasn't in the Divinity School, I was in arts and sciences, but it's funny, there was no digital anything then. So every day we get this, every week we get a little, like a sheet, every week a different color, telling what this week's lecture is. And so I didn't go to most of them. It was like basket weaving in Mozambique or something, which somehow. So I went to this one lecture. It's very interesting. And this a professor, nice guy, and the point that really struck me, and it kind of changed the way I saw things. He said that in the Christian universe, and by that I mean, Catholicism, Protestantism, Orthodox, everything, just that there are basically two groups of people. One group is faithful, very faithful, and they're not really that concerned with having like a rational understanding or understanding historical issues. And so they become very attached to things like outer dress or things like that. And something which Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta said is the worst kind of Vaishnavism, where you think that a devotee is someone that dresses a particular way, or anyway, Hare Krishna. So, so there's and that's most people in any religion. And then there's a group of people who may be faithful and devoted, but really need for themselves a rational understanding. They're actually concerned about history, and they want to separate real facts about our tradition from things that people just say, because there's a tendency that there's all kinds of legends and myths that accumulate. By myth, I don't mean the idea of the soul. That's not a myth. I'm just talking about the idea, for example, that, anyway, I won't go into everything, my stump speech, but so Prabhupada, the first direct instruction he gave to me, because I wrote him a letter. The letter was, should I stay in school at UC Berkeley, or should I just drop out and go out in the street and sell incense? I didn't say that, but that's what I ended up doing. Or should I just? That's very theological, right? So I asked Prabhupada, should I just do full-time temple service or should I stay in school? And interestingly, Prabhupada wrote to me, you should stay in the university. That was his first instruction to me. And just like I was telling the three of us in his family that the first instruction Prabhupada received from his guru turned out to be the real mission of his life, which was to present Krishna consciousness to English-speaking people, Western people. And so, you know, at my little junior level, Prabhupada's first instruction to me also became the mission of my life, which was, he said, I want you to be nicely educated, well educated, so that you can present Krishna consciousness to educated people. And so Prabhupada was very concerned about this. Prabhupada was, you know, young people, and also in America, there's a sense that everyone's the same, everyone's equal, which is true spiritually. Materially, it's not true. There are definitely economic classes. There are social classes. There are educational classes. There are, you know, some people get into prestigious universities and some people don't. Some people win Olympic medals and most of them don't. Now the World Cup is going on. And, you know, thank you for coming to this program and perhaps missing some world, but you can still see the highlights on YouTube. So, you know, and some teams win and some teams don't. So the idea that we're equal is totally a metaphysical idea. It's empirical nonsense. There's no conceivable, empirical, scientific test you could give human populations that would tell you that everyone's equal. So empirically, it's absurd. It's not absurd metaphysically. And that's why Krishna talks, not physically, but metaphysically. That's why Krishna talks about equality. Many times, he says, Pandita Samadarshana, that those who are wise see everyone equally, spiritually. He says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane, whether you're looking at a Brahman who's a first-class Brahman, which is Vidya Vinaya Sampanne, which means endowed with wisdom and humility. If a Brahman is humble but not wise, or wise but not humble, he's kind of like a bull, what do they say, a bull in a china shop. So, so Krishna says a high-class Brahmana, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavi, a cow, Hasti, an elephant, Shuni, a dog, Shapakecha, dog eater. Literally, actually the verse is literally a dog cooker. Gross. But there, you know, especially in Asia, especially in the Far East, I mean, there are people that cook and eat dogs, which is about as yucky as it sounds. And so, anyway, so that was considered super low class. So, but yet all these people, different species of animals, different levels of human beings. Krishna says, Samak Sarveshu Bhuteshu Mad Bhakting Lavate Param, that one who is equal to all creatures achieves the highest devotion for me. Krishna says, Samoaham, I am equal, Sarva Bhuteshu, to all creatures. Name de shosti, I don't hate anyone. Name priya, I don't favor anyone. So there is equality. There's definitely spiritual equality. It's just not material. And Prabhupada was keenly aware of that. Prabhupada was very keenly aware of that. And therefore, he definitely was paying attention to kind of like the demographics of people who were joining the Hare Krishna movement. He was paying very close attention, and he talked about it very strongly because what history shows is that if a religious movement or spiritual movement cannot somehow attract or retain or develop wise people, people who actually become expert in their own sacred texts, people who are inclined as Brahmins teach, people who are studious, who are wise, and who are strongly inclined to help others to understand. So, therefore, getting back to my original point, you see, you might have thought that because of my advanced age, I had no idea what I began talking about, but actually I remember. So if we look at ISKCON from a historical point of view, to what extent do the members of this movement perceive themselves as engaged in a spiritual science, or to what extent they think, this is the one true religion? And to what extent they really understand this is a spiritual science? To what extent is there what would the word be, esprit de corps? To what extent is there sort of a collective enthusiasm and recognition that this is all about reaching out to others, helping others to understand? Or to what extent are we becoming ritual centric, or in our language, puja centric? Now, the deities are beautiful, and we all love the deities. I'm not engaged in iconoclasm here, do away with the icons. We all worship the deity. We all need to worship the deity, and it gives us great strength spiritually. However, Prabhupada made very clear, he said it many times, that our central activity is actually reaching out, helping other people to learn about Krishna. And in order to remain strong and pure-hearted, we worship the deity, because when you go out to teach, you're sort of like, the one who knows it all, or the know-it-all. When we go out to teach, we are the teachers, and we're trying to help people who, false humility aside, just have less knowledge about God. And so we're in that position of trying to help people, teach them. And so therefore, it's very purifying for a teacher to regularly come to a temple and bow down and remember who's really in charge. And so worshiping the deity, as Prabhupada explained, is something that keeps us pure. Also, when you go out in the street, speak, you can't always, perhaps keep absolutely as, well bathed at every moment as you'd like to be, but you have to clean up physically to go see the deity. So it's very purifying. At the same time, Prabhupada made very clear that the central activity is teaching. And so, in fact, the Bhagavatam, there's a very heavy verse. The Bhagavatam is very heavy. It's not for the lighthearted. So there's this verse in the Bhagavatam that says, Archayam eva haraye pujam yakshadhaye hate, which means that one who, I'll translate it very literally for you, one who undertakes, ihate, Archayam eva haraye pujam, who undertakes worship of the Lord, Hari, but only Archayam, only in the deity form. Archa means the deity, and so Archayam means in the deity form. And Natad Bhakteshu, and that person does not recognize that the same deity that's on the altar is also in the heart of all the devotees. So that the body of every devotee is actually a mandir. It actually is a temple. And so just as you behave, hopefully you're on your best behavior when you come into the temple. So when you have this realization that every devotee body is a temple as much as this building. But of course, we need the building to get to the higher realization. And then it says, Natad Bhakteshu Chanyeshu, and everyone else, not just devotees, not just card-carrying members of the Hare Krishna movement, but actually every living being, the deity, the same deity. Oops, we have a picture here. Okay, that's the deity, not different. So the same deity is in the heart of every living thing. That means every living body is a temple of Krishna. So we come to a physical temple like this to practice seeing Krishna. So the real test of how well you did in the temple is what happens when you walk out of the temple. Do you carry that vision of Krishna So you see Krishna in every living being? Or does someone think, no, well, actually Krishna is over there in that building. Here's the address. So now the Bhagavatam concludes that a person who only sees the deity in the actual temple, only sees Krishna there, and does not see Krishna in other living beings, the Bhagavatam says Savhakta, which means that devotee. Prakrita Smrita is on the material platform. It's a material devotee. Prakriti means matter in Sanskrit, Prakriti, and Prakrita means material. So that devotee is material. In other words, that person is not a spiritual devotee, it's a material devotee. Because he thinks that God just lives in one room, in the city. Okay, if you want to see God, he's over in that building. I mean, Krishna is here, but he's also everywhere else. And so temple worship is meant to inspire us and enlighten us so that we see Krishna everywhere. And if you see Krishna in the heart of other people, guess what? They are family. What do they say in India? Jagat Kutumbak or something like that. They have the expression. Yeah, it's a nice expression, and a few people actually follow it. So, so now getting back to Prabhupada and getting back to wither the Hare Krishna movement. That's an old word, which means like, where the heck is it going? So if you look at the Hare Krishna movement, is it continuing to be a movement that is really focused on giving Krishna to everyone, where that's the main activity, or not? And so, and that's kind of what happens to religions over time. And then, of course, there are boom bust cycles, because typically what happens is the religion is starting to kind of run out of gas and become just sort of rituals and doctrines and everything. Then along comes a reformer, wild-eyed reformer like myself. And actually, I don't think I'm wild-eyed, but so, different reformers may come along, and then it goes well. And anyway, I won't go through the whole thing, whole sociology of it, but so I think it's good for us. I think it's good for us to really develop our powers of self-criticism, not to depress ourselves, not to defeat ourselves, but it's like, serious athletes after the game, they watch films of the game. Okay, this is where I should have done this and I did that. Now, got people that just, play, get a ball and go play in the park. They don't film it and they don't watch the film. It's the serious athletes that watch the films after the game. And so if you raise the question, are we serious? Are we serious about preserving Prabhupada's mood, which was preaching? If someone's not really into spreading Krishna consciousness, there's a lot about Prabhupada they still need to learn. So that's, I guess, the message. And so what, if we ourselves are advancing, it's like, let's say you go to see a movie, or you watch a movie at home or whatever, and you really like it. You think that was a great movie. What do? You tell your friends. You can't not tell your friends, right? Even if they say, don't tell me, but you still tell them. So or let's say someone goes to a restaurant, they, wow, it's great food. They tell their friends. So when we have great experiences, you can't hold it in. You want to tell your friends about it. And so if someone is not, let's say, really into telling other people about Krishna, it's because that person is not really having great experiences. I mean, that person may be a faithful devotee and is doing nice service and all that. But when you're actually ecstatic, when you're actually you're advancing. I mean, let's say you get in your car and you're driving somewhere, like, okay, let's go to New Vrindavan, so here, and let's say you get on the highway and it's bumper to bumper, and it just, the traffic is just flying at about an average of 3 miles an hour. And so, I mean, theoretically, you will eventually get there, but it's like, you know, you just, so when you see something new, and so in Krishna consciousness, if we are advancing, if we are really becoming purified, if we are really advancing toward our pure state of consciousness, then every day is like a new experience. Every day is exciting, it's thrilling, because every day, or at least every week, you are seeing the whole world in a way you've never seen it before. You are seeing other people in a way you've never seen them before. And it's that thrill, it's that excitement, it's that ecstasy of discovering who you really are. That's what makes you want to go shout it from the rooftops. Because you're having such ecstatic experiences that you just have to tell people about it. You can't keep it in. And that's the spirit of preaching. It's not just making the pious decision to go and harass other people on the street. It's not just about piety. It's not just about badgering people. It's reminds me, there's a really nice, there's a really nice song by George Harrison. I think it's I Want to Tell You. And the first words of this George Harrison song are, which of course he was very much influenced by Krishna consciousness, are, I want to tell you, my head is full of things to say. And so I won't sing it for you, although not too bad, but it's, if you think of those words, I want to tell you, my head is full of things to say. And so that's really the mood of a preacher of Krishna consciousness, that you just, first of all, you are realizing that everyone is related to you. It's all family. And so, and you're so enthusiastic about what's happening in your life, the experiences you are having, that you want to go tell people. That is what Prabhupada created. Thank you. So that was the Hare Krishna movement under Prabhupada. Of course, it was a very special time, but it seems to me, even though, you know, we are not Prabhupada, but it seems to me that people in my position, in other words, people that take sannyas for the purpose of getting free lunch for the rest of their life. No, but people, let's say people who are to really take Prabhupada seriously means to spend your whole life trying to act on that platform, trying to practice Krishna consciousness on the platform that Prabhupada brought us to. Because that's what Prabhupada did. That's who Prabhupada is. Prabhupada was, you know, pure devotee, Paramahansa, as we say. And he was so powerful that he could inspire people around him to ecstatically go out and try to give people the great gift that they were receiving. That's the mood of Krishna consciousness under Prabhupada. And I'll just keep saying it till I guess, so people start charging me for lunch. Then I'll know I'm really bothering people. But so anyway, so I think we should have the power of introspection, individually and collectively. We can't just give lectures all the time about what's wrong with the material world and never take a good, honest look at ourselves. It doesn't mean we want to discourage ourselves, or I want to discourage others, or if you're not on the highest platform, then, you know, you're useless. It's not that. It's not that kind of abusive, pep talk. Because when Prabhupada was there, even if someone, let's say, there were lots of people when Prabhupada was there that didn't really feel comfortable going out on the street or talking to people, but they would help in other ways. they could help cook, they could help clean, they could drive, when I was 20 years old, I was visiting the Los Angeles temple in the summer of 1969 when I was home from school. And anyway, so I would drive over my mother's car. It wasn't like nowadays where everybody has their own car. And so I would drive the senior devotees over. They would do Sankirtan chanting on Hollywood Boulevard. And so the senior devotees would ride with me in the car rather than going in the crowded van. So people like Tamal Krishna, Ramachari, Vishnu Jana, and other people, they would, I'd drive my mother's car out to Hollywood Boulevard. But and so not everyone was able to go out and share Krishna consciousness, but everyone was helping. It was like an army. They say an army moves on its stomach. If you look at what a real army is, there's a big kitchen department. There are the engineers. There's the map makers. There's all kinds of people. It's not that everyone is firing a gun. So that's the real unity of ISKCON, where everyone, whatever their ability, whatever you feel comfortable doing, everyone is doing what's natural for them, but it's all part of a united effort to give Krishna to everyone. That's Prabhupada. That's the real Prabhupada. Not just someone who is like really concerned about what kind of clothes you wear or something, which is not Prabhupada, by the way. Here's a direct quote from Prabhupada. We do not care about dress. Dress is a dead thing. Direct quote. Dress is a dead thing. We care about living consciousness. So it's not just about how you dress and where you live. It's about that spirit of compassion, of enthusiasm, that you are experiencing Krishna's mercy and you just want to share it with others. So I will stop there. Any questions on these points? No refunds. Yeah, go ahead.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. What's your name?
I'm Randy.
Hey, Randy.
Well, I had obviously many questions I would like to ask you, but first I'd just like to briefly share. A few days back, I had a maintenance man come to my house to fix a window that's in our temple room. And amidst some just casual conversation, this maintenance man stops and looks at me and goes, "I really like your setup here." And he was looking at Krishna on the walls and he was looking at the altar. And the temple room is obviously intriguing to people, but not everybody feels comfortable enough to engage in that conversation. And so, I talked to him about the soul and karma, and he told me he believes in karma through witnessing it. And I gave him some information that I had. But afterwards, when he left, because I was kind of shocked that he said something, I realized why I believed he said something as I was giving an offering to Krishna. And it was just simply nothing new for me to learn, but just simply because Krishna is all attractive by the very meaning of his name. And that's why, this maintenance man can come in and, like you're talking about, want to share that experience. Something nudged him inside to say, "I really enjoy what you have going on here." So I just found that really interesting. And while you were speaking, it reminded me of a philosophy book that I had read. I used to major in philosophy.
Really?
Yes.
Where was that?
The University of Evansville, but they cut my majors and stuff, so I don't go there anymore. They don't think that philosophy is worthy. It's not higher education, apparently.
It's not like business.
Yeah, that's what they're trying to bring more of. But there's a book, and I believe the book that we were reading whenever we were discussing this topic was by Dorothy Sowell on mysticism and resistance. And
Resistance, mysticism and resistance.
yes, so we discussed a big theme, and I wrote a paper on it about how it is so counterintuitive to not want to share your religious experiences when you have literal experiences. And that was the best paper I actually ever did on. My professor loved it, and he told me that he could see that it came from like a feeling of experience. And so I don't really have a question there with that. Everything connected for me. I really enjoyed your talk with that. And then one question that I wanted to give was like about literalism. I don't know if that's a word.
Yeah, very much.
Okay, good. So one thing my therapist tells me is that it's a feeling, not a truth.
Wait, hold a second. Literalism is a feeling.
No, not that. I just want to talk about like literalism in general. But
What was he talking about? The feeling, not a truth?
My therapist tells me that certain things that like concern me. It's a feeling, but that doesn't mean that it's a truth.
Oh,
So I might feel one way, but that doesn't mean that it's true. And so I wanted to ask you if when I say if I feel like alone in a struggle with something, but I know it's not true, is that still in a way making that my reality, as you were discussing? Like, is that a way of me turning from Krishna, or is that a part of the process?
give an example, a practical example.
Me like,
That would anything that would just illustrate what you mean.
just like any like struggles, you could say mundane struggles of like, I can't pay my bills, something like that. Like,
Right.
nobody understands me and my personal problems as to why this is so hard, why I can't pay my bills, something like that. I know that that's not true, right? Because I know that Krishna sees everything and understands me more than anybody. But that feeling, is that a way of making that my reality? And if so, how should I like?
Well, in a sense, Krishna says in the Gita that he reciprocates with us. So, ye yadamam prapadyante, as everyone approaches me, tam sadaya bhajamiyam, I precisely reciprocate with them. And so, if I do not depend on Krishna, because I just don't have that faith, I don't really depend on Krishna, then in a sense, I'm not inviting Krishna to really take charge of my life. And so there is a sense that where a feeling can become reality. It depends on how and to what extent you act on the feeling. Like, for example, let's say someone has a feeling that I don't want to live in the city anymore. And if the feeling gets strong enough, then the person moves. Or if you say that, it's like, where's the line between paranoia and irrational fear? So Krishna says in the Gita, for example, in chapter 18, verse 30 through 32, which I recommend to you. Krishna's talking about buddhi, intelligence, and the different modes of nature. And so buddhi, as opposed to jnana means sort of like worldview. Whereas buddhi is analytic intelligence, like to separate things like what's right, what's wrong, and stuff like that. So it's the analytic kind of intelligence that sees the different components. And so Krishna says that in the mode of goodness, sattvika buddhi, intelligence, rational analytic intelligence, the mode of goodness, a person can understand what is dangerous and what is not. And so some fears are rational. For example, if I'm spending more than I'm making, and I'm afraid that I'm going to end up, living in a converted gymnasium or something, then that's a rational fear. Whereas if I fear that, let's say, bright green Neptunians are chasing me, that's probably an irrational fear. Or, for example, in relationships, sometimes a person fears that their partner is not being faithful. Sometimes that is irrational paranoia, And sometimes it's just good intuition. And so as far as saying feelings are not a reality, it depends. It depends on the feeling. Some feelings are reality in the sense that what you feel corresponds to what's actually out there. And sometimes it doesn't. So in that sense, even, apart from Krishna consciousness, but becoming a healthy human being, a rational human being means that there is a very good alignment between your feelings and what's actually there. For example, you can feel that someone really cares about me when everyone around you can see that no, that person doesn't care about you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you can know that a person cares about you when other people don't appreciate the fact. So it's so as far as a relationship between feelings and reality, I wouldn't go with that Maha Mantra, feelings are not reality. What I would do is just say it depends on how rational you are, to what extent, or how intelligent you are. And by that, I don't mean you read a million books. I just mean really good common sense, really, keeping your eyes open. So if someone is sort of astute and clear-headed, then their feelings often do correspond to what's really out there. And if not, then... So Krishna talks about all that in 1830 through 32.
I think sometimes we just get conditioned to think and feel a certain way. And that's what is part of the process of understanding and accepting that Krishna is always there. Because that's still a really big undertaking, to just understand that God is always there with you. Like you're talking about being on your best behavior all the time because your body is the temple of Krishna is there. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
Somewhat regarding to topic. I've had devotees throughout the years commit suicide or attempt suicide. I remember living in Manhattan at the building that we had downtown. So one of my colleagues said, "That's some psychological condition." Tried to commit suicide. And a lot of the aspects that I noticed within ISKCON at the time was that, we didn't really, I met my current wife to a 12-step program called CODA, CO-EA, codependency.
Oh.
And it's based on the 12 steps of
Right.
AA, but modified to relationship with the people that are going through divorces, like I was and she was, and we'll come together and admit that we're powerless over the situation. That's the number one, admitting that you're powerless, and that's take it from there. And then the second step is changing the belief system that ain't our way in ourselves, get us to an emotional sanity. Emotional effects, especially for your marriage and your whatever. In any case, the point that I'm making, that I've noticed that within ISKCON, the community doesn't really support the dialogue. It's a weak program, and it was very nice to mention. Once I see Krishna within your heart and my heart and everyone's heart, then we have a family. And the dynamics of a good family is to have good communication, not so much a judgmental and Nazi type mentality, but one that is open. No, and I do find that Nazi type mentality, not just in Hare Krishnas, but I find as Roman Catholic, that I was put up in Colombia, very strict.
Colombia.
Yes, I'm full, so it was done. In any case, so the need for dialogue between the devotees, and it's important because there are a lot of serious isolation, within.
Yeah, here's how I would explain that. If you look at our teachings, a lot of what Krishna says or describes is hierarchical. For example, families, parents have to govern, take care of their children. Or the Varna system, Brahmins, being the highest Varna, Kshatriyas, the governors. And the ashrams were, sannyasis, they're called sarvashrama namaskritam. But the other ashramas offer respect to the sannyasis. So it's funny coming from me. So don't forget that. Anyway, so there are all these hierarchies, Varna hierarchies, ashram hierarchies, gurus and disciples, parents and children. And at the same time, there's oneness, which I've explained, which Krishna emphasizes. Krishna, talks a lot about how we're all one. Now, here's the point. The hierarchy is external. The hierarchies are external. Someone has the body of a parent. Someone has the body of the child. Someone has the body of the Brahman or the body of the guru. The hierarchies are external. The oneness is internal and eternal. And so if you have a leader or someone in a position of leadership who is still kind of gravitating toward the bodily concept of life, then even in a religious movement, it's the hierarchy that strikes that person as, the really important part of all this. Whereas if someone is truly in spiritual consciousness, they respect the hierarchies. They're part of the way society functions. But what's really important to that person is the oneness. So like one thing I said, one of my little, sound bites in my stump speech is that one of the first qualifications to be a guru, in my view, is that ultimately you don't really think you're better than your disciples. I mean, clearly it's like parents. I mean, you have to be the parent. You can't say, well, we're all one. So, your 3-year-old kid can eat whatever he or she likes. And it's not like, the hierarchies are what civilize us. However, if someone is actually in Krishna consciousness, they don't feel they're better than other people. It's just like, let's say you have children. You don't think that you're better than your children. You don't think you're more important than your children. To the contrary, you have to serve them. It's just that it's your duty to be the adult and to make certain decisions. But the fact that you're in charge as the parent doesn't mean that ultimately you think you're better than your children. And so the real qualification to be a spiritual leader is that you don't think you're better than other people. And so what happens? You're adults. Can I treat you like adults? Okay, in the real world, in every religion, you name it, in every religion, there are some leaders who are really, spiritual, and there are some people who are not that spiritual, but they follow or appear to follow the basic principles, and they're good at management. And so inevitably, in every religion, you will get some people. I'm not saying most of the managers or most of the leaders. I'm not, because some of them really very good devotees, but you do get, definitely, you get people who rise to positions of authority here or there, including, very high positions, because they kind of follow the basics and they're good at organizing. And they're not necessarily spiritually advanced, but they may hold high positions, high administrative positions. They may hold the highest administrative positions. And they're not, by their behavior, it's obvious, they're not that advanced. They don't have such great character. They're not nice to other people. That's just reality, real world, you know? So, and some people in high positions got there because they really are Krishna conscious. So we can apply that test. If someone is a leader and hierarchy is more important to them than oneness, they're not very advanced. It's that simple. It doesn't mean that an advanced person, dissolves the hierarchy. There has to be, and that's just the way the world functions. But yeah, so that's the test really. And I think if you look at any religion on earth, you will find people that rise to high positions by this combination of sort of basically practicing and being good at managing or getting money or just being good at organizing things. But in ISKCON, you see, it's funny because when Prabhupada was here, he was obviously the spiritual leader, and he also was the highest administrator. He had the final word on administrative issues. When Prabhupada actually appointed me to the GBC in 1974, he personally appointed me and he put me in charge of Latin America. And so the system was when the GBC would meet, the governing body, we would meet, a morning session, an afternoon session. And after each session, we go to Prabhupada's room and read the resolutions. And he was like the Roman emperor, like, yes, no, talk about it some more, send it back for further discussion. And so, but because Prabhupada combined these two positions, he was the supreme administrator and the supreme spiritual leader. So in fact, when Prabhupada named gurus, 11 gurus, after when he was preparing to leave this world, what I find fascinating as a historian is that he didn't choose anybody who was just a pure Brahmin, like very knowledgeable in Shastra and humble. All the people he chose were managers and preachers, of course, and preachers. He didn't choose one person who was just a nice Brahminical preacher, but wasn't in charge of anything. Now that, if you know your sociology of religion, Max Weber et al., then this is like a cliche in the sociology of religion, that in the first stage of a new religious movement, you have a charismatic leader. This is from the Greek word charisma with a K, and that's the original word, which actually means, it's very close to what we call Shakti Avesh. Like if someone has a divine gift to preach, or someone is empowered, we say empowered. And so what we mean by a devotee being empowered is what people who study religion would call charisma. The charisma doesn't mean Elvis Presley, or it means that sort of perception that someone has a divine gift. So that's typical, very typical, the first stage of a new religion, because all authority is seen to lie in that person. For example, in the 70s, when Prabhupada was there, we go out to sell books, and if a sign said no solicitation, obviously that was not for devotees. That was a sign for the material world, not for the spiritual world. And so, we were young and we were coming out of the revolutionary student movement. So like, we're really going to follow a sign, soliciting. So because we had that notion, fortunately, many of us have become adults since then, but we had this idea that we follow a higher law, that if Prabhupada said to sell books, that is God's direct order coming from Prabhupada, and these mundane worldly authorities, like, who cares about that? You find exactly this mood in the New Testament. For example, Israel was a patriarchal society. And so just within that culture, and in most ancient cultures in that region, giving a proper burial to your family was, extremely important. It's extremely important. The father was, giving a proper burial to your father there was no more important religious duty. And so some young guy wanted to join the Jesus movement. He said, but I have to go bury my father. And Jesus says, well, let the dead bury the dead, come with me. So anyway, I'm not going to critique Jesus, but it's kind of like early ISKCON, let the dead bury the dead, come with me. And so, because we follow a higher law, so all lower laws are just, they're not for us. So anyway, you have that mood, and then you get sort of like this trickle down autocracy, where someone's, and so it, because Prabhupada was acting as a charismatic leader in the classical sociology, religion sense of the word. And of course, he was a real leader, and so then it's like, monkey see, monkey do. It's like when you're a little kid, you sort of walk in your father's shoes or your mother's shoes or something. And so, so you get this sort of what I call trickle down autocracy. I mean, I remember when I was 20 years old and I joined the Berkeley Temple, and if I was given any little authority, first time I was given a little authority over, I've been in the movement maybe like 3 months, and there was these 2 hippies that joined. They'd been in the movement maybe a few weeks or a couple of days. So I was told just to walk them down Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley to the Sankirtan party. And so when we left the temple, I basically went crazy because, I had absolute authority over these people. And I went nuts. Because in the material world, no one gave a damn what I said. You're 20 years old, who cares what you say? Your friends don't care. Your parents certainly aren't going to listen to you. No one cares. Your teachers. So it's, you never have authority over anyone unless you, I don't know, help out in the local elementary school or something. So then I remember these 2 guys, they looked at me and they said, like, what are you doing? And I realized that, okay, temporary insanity. But it's, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so when you have a spiritual movement where you believe, I would say in this case correctly, that the authority is really coming from God. And so when you're put in charge of someone, you really believe that, that you have to go through me to get to God. And that when I speak to you, it's like God speaking to you. And that can make people very, very wonky. So we've had a lot of that. So to be in a position where you're representing, low battery, anyway. So yes, if someone is not really spiritually advanced, having a position of leadership will affect them. It will affect them, and you have to be really spiritually advanced so that you can sincerely, deeply respect the people around you, not consider yourself better than them, and really just want to help. So that definitely is an issue. How do you develop a spiritual society without getting a bunch of little banana republic dictators? And I think it's good to talk about it. I am not accusing like this one or that one. I'm just saying that I think in a spiritual movement, it's really healthy that we openly talk about these things. Not in an accusatorial way, like, yeah, and here's my personal list of the worst. I won't give it to you. So, I have it, but I won't give it to you. So, so yes.
Yeah, well, the thing too is, you approach someone at the temple, I have this problem, and something, which I do, Raj, chant Hare Krishna, I don't have time to talk to you because, I got something, and it just doesn't work that way. And I think that was one of the problems where so many people left this time, because there was really no relationship, there was no personality, and it wasn't such a big monster of, basically a money-making machine that.
Well, that's, yeah, in the old days, I call it the Vedic Lord of the Flies, because, we were all young. If you study the populations of other sort of relatively advanced mammals like elephants, gorillas, what you find is that when a community is deprived of their elders or has no elders, they develop bizarre behavior, antisocial, self-destructive behavior. And so the way I put it, I remember a time very clearly when in the whole International Society for Krishna Consciousness, with thousands of members all around the world, there was one mature adult. It was Prabhupada. And so, and also, that wasn't Prabhupada's plan. ISKCON was plan B, by the way. If you look at all of Prabhupada's letters, that he wrote, even before he came to America. When he came to America, he was still operating kind of in the Indian model, where you have these very severe hierarchies. And so Prabhupada thought, he'll go to America, he'll try to persuade or attract leading citizens, and then people will follow them. I mean, the reality, meanwhile, in America was that, people mostly follow Shudras, like, whether they're musicians or actors. I mean, for example, even the BBC, which I used to think, was not crazy like everybody else. I remember, a couple of years ago, at the end of every year, they have this article, this sort of with pictures. Here are all the sort of like important people we lost this year. Here are all the important people that passed away. So I looked at it, and it was like 80% people in the entertainment industry. Actors, singers. I mean, it was shocking. So Prabhupada came, he wrote all these letters, the Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation, leading citizens, and it's like that Beatles song, No Reply. And so then when that happened, so meanwhile, some young people started approaching, and so Prabhupada thought, well, this is what Krishna is manifesting. And so you have a movement with all young people, everyone's kind of immature, and suddenly some of the people have this absolute power, and it's kind of like a sociological no-brainer what happened. And so I find it's a big mistake to think that these things happen because devotees are just, what's wrong? No, it happened because there were humans. It's a human thing. You look at any society, any religious society, political society, social action society, cultural movement. When you get that combination of conditions, you get similar results. It was predictable. So now I think going forward, we have this wonderful opportunity to really build a great spiritual society. Yes.
You said something to the effect of if you aren't ecstatic and you aren't, just telling everybody about your Krishna consciousness, then you need to get to know Prabhupada better. How do you do that?
Oh, how to get to that point?
How do you get to know Prabhupada?
How do you get to know?
No Prabhupada.
Yeah, Prabhupada. I would say good association. They say a man is known by the company he keeps. And so if I, for example, let's say I want to be a doctor, but I'm not a doctor. So I go to medical school. I associate with doctors, and then I can become a doctor. Or, for example, I just published a novel, infomercial alert. I should have brought some, but anyway, I published this novel, which apparently people really love. So because I thought this was a powerful way to spread Krishna consciousness. So I studied, for years, I studied great novelists. My favorite being actually Jane Austen. But so for years, I just studied great novelists and like, how do you do this? So I'd say good association. Decide what you want to be, and then find people who are there and associate with them. So I guess we'll stop here. Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure.
Let's please thank Maharaj by chanting Haribol. Thank you so much, Maharaj. The enlightening talk. Let me just check to see if there are any questions online.
Oh, sure.
So if so, then are there any questions on Zoom? Does anybody want to ask any questions online? Please unmute yourselves and ask. Okay, so well, if there aren't any more questions, then we can probably end today's discussion. Okay, and I'll do a series of very quick announcements, and then we can do prasadam prayers. Okay, I'm going to end this meeting now, and
thank you all so much for joining online.